Ever get that feeling, where like your heart's racing, palms are all sweaty, and you just can't quite put your finger on WHY?
Yeah, yeah.
That's emotion in action. And it's so much more complex than we often realize.
It really is.
Today, we're doing a deep dive into the psychology of emotion.
Oh, cool.
We've got a whole stack of sources here.
Hmm.
We're going to talk about everything from like classic philosophy to some of the cutting-edge theories,
Sounds fascinating.
even how our understanding of feelings has changed over time.
Right.
Get ready for some serious aha moments as we unpack what makes us, well, feel the way we do.
Well, you've got some amazing material here. I mean, we can really trace the whole evolution of how people have thought about emotion and how different schools of thought have approached this, just really central part of human experience.
Absolutely. So let's kick things off with like the OG brainiacs, the philosophers,
Well, yeah.
Descartes, the I think, therefore I am guy.
Right.
He had some pretty interesting thoughts on emotions.
He did. Descartes, he kind of saw emotions as this messy part of being human,
Oh, interesting.
Like they could cloud your judgment, make you act irrationally. But at the same time, he also recognized that without emotions, we wouldn't really be human. We'd be kind of like machines.
So emotions were both a blessing and a curse for him.
Like a double-edged sword.
Exactly. Now, fast forward a few centuries to William James, one of the early psychologists.
Okay.
He basically flipped Descartes' idea on its head. He said, we don't, feel fear and then run away,
Yeah.
We run away, our heart's racing, and we interpret all that as fear.
So you're saying the physical reaction as the emotion?
Yes.
Whoa. That's kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah, it really shifted the focus to the physical side of things.
Mm.
And then you've got Duffy, another psychologist, who really challenged this whole emotion equals chaos idea. She said, it's more about high energy, like when you're really focused on something,
Yeah.
It's like a passion project.
So not losing control, but more like intense focus. Yeah, exactly. Duffy, she saw the potential in emotion. You know how they can energize us, help us adapt?
Yeah.
It's actually a theme that you see popping up a lot, even in modern emotion theories.
Wow, this is already making me see my own emotions in a whole new light.
That's great.
So you mentioned different schools of thought. One that really jumped out at me from the sources was this phenomenological approach. What's that all about?
Oh, yeah. Phenomenology, it's all about that subjective experience of emotion. It's like how it actually feels to you, not just what you're doing on the outside. Like,
Okay.
it's about the texture of the emotion,
So like that, burst of pride when you nail a presentation.
Yeah, yeah.
Or that heavy feeling of sadness after a loss.
Exactly.
That's what they'd focus on.
Totally. A big name in this approach is Sartre, the philosopher. He believed that, real, genuine emotions are impossible to fake,
Oh, interesting.
Like, think about that, gut-wrenching grief that you can't hide.
Oh.
That's the kind of authenticity he was talking about. And he saw these raw emotions as, crucial to how we understand ourselves and the world.
So how we see ourselves, like our self-image, is actually tied to how we experience emotions.
Yeah. Phenomenologists, they'd say, your mood. It affects your confidence, your outlook, how you even interpret things.
Right.
Like, if you're in a bad mood, doesn't everything just seem worse?
It's like looking at the world through these emotion-tinted glasses.
I love that analogy.
Thanks.
Now, on the flip side, we've got behaviorism. They kind of take a different approach.
Okay.
They're less interested in that internal feeling and more in what you actually do when you're emotional.
So instead of asking, how does it feel, they're asking, what do you do when you feel that way?
Exactly. They're really focused on the actions we learn in response to different emotional triggers. It's like, imagine, training a dog. We kind of learn emotional responses through reinforcement,
Right, right.
both positive and negative.
So if, say, you had a really bad experience with public speaking as a kid, a behaviorist would say that you learn to fear it because of all the negative stuff you associate with.
Exactly. One behaviorist, Millinson, he actually had a pretty, I guess you could say, stark view.
Oh.
He suggested that if you're experiencing anxiety for a long time, it could lead to bigger problems, maybe even neurosis. And if you don't have enough positive reinforcement, that could even play a role in psychosis.
Wow, that makes those little joys in life seem even more important.
Right.
Maybe focusing on happy moments can actually help prevent bigger issues down the line.
It's an interesting connection for sure. Now, we've touched on how we learn emotions, but what about what's happening in our brains and bodies? Time to peek under the hood, look at the physiology of all this.
Let's get into it. What's the science saying?
Well, there's this neuroscientist, Panksepp. He did some groundbreaking work with mammals.
Okay.
And his research suggests that we actually have basic emotion systems wired into our brains.
Mm.
We're talking about fear, rage, joy, even playfulness.
So you're telling me that we share those emotional systems with, like, squirrels and dogs and stuff?
It really seems that way. It points to a deep evolutionary connection.
Wow. That's incredible.
So it's not just us humans feeling these things. It's really rooted in our shared mammalian heritage.
That's amazing. So if we've got these, like, basic systems, how do we get to all the complex emotions that feel uniquely human?
That's where a theory called the component process model comes in. This one was developed by Schachter,
Okay.
and it highlights how everything kind of syncs up to create that full emotional experience. Your thoughts, your body's reactions, your motivations, even your facial expressions, all of it.
Like a whole orchestra playing together to create this symphony of emotion.
Exactly. And it shows how interconnected everything is when we talk about feelings. Now, this might have you thinking, okay, are emotions just random? Why do we even feel this way?
Right.
Well, our sources actually delve into the evolutionary advantages of emotions. It's not all chaos. There's actually a reason for all these feelings.
So you're saying that even my, like, totally irrational fear of spiders is there for a reason. It's not just me being silly.
Yeah. I mean, there's likely an evolutionary basis for it. Emotions, even the unpleasant ones, they helped us survive. Fear keeps us safe. Anger helps us defend ourselves. Love fosters connection and cooperation.
Right.
They're all nudges in the right direction from an evolutionary standpoint.
Fascinating.
Hmm.
But we're more than just our primal instincts, right? Like, our thoughts must play a role too.
Oh, absolutely. That's where the cognitive revolution in psychology comes in. This is where things get really interesting.
Okay, tell me more.
They emphasize that emotions aren't just automatic reactions. Our thoughts play a huge role.
Wait, hold on. You're telling me that, like, how I think about a situation actually changes how I feel about it.
Yeah.
So, say you see a friend. One person might feel pure joy, but someone else might feel happy, but also anxious. Maybe because of some, like, unresolved issue.
Right.
Same event, but totally different emotional responses.
Exactly. That's a perfect example of how our thoughts shape emotions.
Wow.
It's not just the event itself. It's the meaning we give it, based on our memories, beliefs, all that.
I'm starting to see how powerful our minds really are. Now, you mentioned some famous research, the Schachter study. Didn't they, like, actually inject people with adrenaline to study that?
They did. It's a classic study.
Wow.
And they found that, just feeling your heart race or whatever, that wasn't enough to experience a specific emotion. You needed the physical change, a thought, a label, to explain what you're feeling.
So if you're all hyped up, you might label that as excitement, anxiety, or even anger, depending on how you're interpreting this situation.
Exactly.
Like, if you're on a roller coaster, it's excitement. But if someone cuts you off in traffic, that same physical feeling could be interpreted as anger.
Exactly. That study really solidified this idea. Our thoughts are key to shaping our emotional experience. Now, all these theories that we've been discussing, some researchers, they actually wanted to come up with this one giant unifying theory that could explain it all.
Ooh, that's pretty ambitious.
It is like trying to find one equation to explain the entire universe.
Right.
Oley and Johnson-Laird, they came up with this theory that emotions are basically messages,
Okay.
both inside our own minds and between people.
Interesting.
Like, your feelings are trying to tell you something.
So if I'm, like, feeling super anxious, it's like my mind is saying, hey, pay attention. There might be a problem here.
That's one way to look at it. And then you have Frieda, another theorist, going for that big picture explanation. He focused on the idea of, like, action readiness.
Okay.
He said that emotions basically prepare us to do something. Fear makes us run, anger makes us fight, love makes us connect. It's not just about the passive feeling, it's about getting ready to act.
So it's like our inner alarm system, but instead of just making a noise, it's saying, run or fight or hug or whatever.
That's a great way to put it. Now, we've talked a lot about emotions in general, but what about specific emotions? Like, what makes fear different from joy? How do those differences play out?
I'm ready to get into the nitty-gritty. Let's dive into some specifics.
Okay, so discussed. Have you ever thought about, like, why it feels so deeply unpleasant, so visceral?
It's true. It's like a full-body experience.
Right. There's a psychologist, Rosin, and he suggests that disgust, like, actually evolved to protect us from things that could harm us.
Okay, so like rotten food. You smell it, you're disgusted, you don't eat it.
Exactly. And that same reaction, we might have it to, like, morally reprehensible actions. It's about avoiding contamination, both physical and moral.
So my disgust at, like a bad smell is basically the same emotion as my disgust at, say, like someone cheating on a test.
There's a deep connection there, yeah. Rosin argues that disgust, it helped our ancestors survive. Rotten meat, that could make you sick. And a social transgression, well, that could disrupt the whole group. Disgust kept us safe physically and socially.
That's a fascinating link. Now let's switch gears to love, probably the most talked about emotion of all time. I bet there are more theories about love than we could ever even unpack.
Oh, easily. Entire libraries are devoted to it. But one model that really stands out is Sternberg's triangular theory of love. It's a really helpful way to kind of map out all those different flavors of love that we experience.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break down this love triangle for me.
So the 3 points are intimacy, passion, and commitment. Different combinations create different types of love. Think about that, like fiery passion of a new romance.
Oh, yeah.
That's high on passion, high on intimacy, but maybe low on commitment, right? Then compare that to, say, a long-term marriage, where you might have deep intimacy and strong commitment, but the passion has, mellowed a bit over time.
So it's like a recipe. Different amounts of each ingredient create a different kind of love. That actually makes so much sense when I think about my own relationships. Some have been all fireworks and excitement, and others have been more about that, like deep sense of knowing and trusting someone.
Exactly. Sternberg's model, it really captures all that complexity. Now, we can't ignore the fact that sometimes emotions don't exactly work in our favor. They can get out of whack. And that can lead to real challenges, even disorders.
It's like we're exploring these depths of human emotion, but we also have to acknowledge, the depths of human suffering.
Right. And clinical psychology has spent a lot of time trying to understand and treat these emotional struggles.
Let's start with anxiety. I mean, it feels like everyone's dealing with anxiety these days. What are some of the leading theories on what causes it?
Well, one really prominent theory comes from Barlow, a clinical psychologist. He points to uncertainty and a lack of control as major drivers of anxiety. When we're unsure about what's going to happen, or if we feel like we can't influence the outcome, our anxiety tends to go up.
So if I'm constantly worrying about things I can't control, like, the economy or the weather or whatever, that's basically a recipe for anxiety.
That makes sense, right? And that constant worry, it can be so exhausting, makes it hard to function.
It really does. What about depression? It seems almost like the opposite of anxiety, like a kind of shutting down instead of revving up.
There are lots of theories about depression, but one common idea is learned helplessness. That feeling that, like, nothing you do matters, that you have no control over your own life.
So if you've been through, like, a lot of tough stuff, maybe repeated failures or setbacks, you might start to believe that you're powerless to change things.
Yeah,
And that can lead to depression.
that's a key idea, yeah. And Beck, a cognitive therapist, he takes this even further. He says it's not just that feeling of helplessness, but it's also the negative thoughts that just keep playing on a loop in your head. Like, I'm a failure, nothing good ever happens to me, things will never get better, things like that.
So it's like those thoughts become this self-fulfilling prophecy, making it even harder to escape that feeling of hopelessness. This is all really thought-provoking. It seems like emotions aren't just personal. They're also shaped by the world around us, by our culture, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's like our emotions are having this constant conversation with the social norms and expectations of our culture.
So even something as basic as, like, a smile, which seems so universal, might actually have subtle differences depending on the culture.
Exactly. Ekman, who studied facial expressions, found that some emotions like happiness, sadness, anger, fear, they have universal signals.
Right.
But even those are influenced by cultural norms.
So a smile is a smile, but there might be different rules about, like, when you smile and how you smile, depending on where you are in the world.
That's a great way to put it. Social theories of emotion, they really emphasize how the roles we play, the power dynamics, all those unwritten rules of our culture, they affect how we experience and express emotions. Think about how you might express sadness differently at a funeral compared to at a party.
It's like we're all wearing these different emotional masks, depending on the social situation. We're constantly adjusting, even if we don't realize it.
Exactly. Now, we've been focusing a lot on the psychology of emotion, but it's important to remember that other fields have a lot to contribute to. History, anthropology, they all help us understand the bigger picture.
So it's not just about the brain and the body. It's also about history, culture, even language. They all play a role in how we understand and express our feelings.
Exactly. Historians, they remind us that what was considered an appropriate emotional response, say, 100 years ago, might seem totally strange today. Imagine how people expressed grief in the Victorian era compared to now.
I can just picture those fainting couches and dramatic pronouncements. Speaking of language, how does that actually shape our experience of emotion?
Whereas Bicca, a linguist, argues that the words we have for emotions actually influence how we feel them. Think about it. Do you feel emotions that you don't even have words for?
That's a really interesting question.
It's like language is creating a map for our emotional world.
Wow, that's a really mind-blowing idea. It's like if I don't have a word for a specific feeling, can I even really experience it fully? This deep dive has been incredible. We've gone from basic definitions to exploring the complex interplay of, biology, thoughts, social factors, all shaping our emotions.
Yeah.
And it all started with that simple question: what makes us feel the way we do?
And this is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, there are whole fields dedicated to specific emotions, cultural differences, the role of emotions in decision-making, and so much more.
I already feel like I need to go back and reread all these sources.
That's the beauty of it, right? The more we learn about emotions, the more we realize how much more there is to discover.
So where do we go from here? What are some of those big unanswered questions, the frontiers of emotion research?
Hmm.
One area that I'm really fascinated by is how emotions and technology kind of intersect.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, just think about how social media is designed to trigger certain emotions.
Totally.
Like envy, outrage,
Right.
even addiction.
It's true. Those platforms are really using our emotions to keep us hooked and coming back for more.
It's like they've got us figured out.
And as AI gets even more sophisticated, we're going to have to really grapple with those ethical implications. Machines that can read our emotions,
Yeah.
interpret them, even manipulate them.
It's a bit unnerving when you think about it.
It is. It's like we're entering this whole new frontier of emotional exploration, We're going to need a bigger map.
We are. Another area I think is really ripe for more research is the role of emotions in social movements.
Oh, interesting.
Like, how do emotions like hope, anger, solidarity, how do they actually motivate people to act,
Right.
to fight for justice and equality?
Yeah, that's such a powerful connection.
Think about the role of empathy in fostering compassion.
Absolutely.
Understanding across different cultures,
Right.
or how outrage can actually fuel these movements for social change.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, those are great examples. It really speaks to the potential of emotions to actually drive positive change in the world. Okay, so I guess we've got our marching orders for future deep dives.
Oh, exactly.
Emotions and technology, emotions and social change, and I'm sure there are countless others that we haven't even touched on today.
Right.
It's pretty exciting to think about all those discoveries that are waiting for us
Yeah.
as we keep exploring this essential and I think often overlooked aspect of what it means to be human.
I totally agree. And, all this talk about the future of emotion research is really exciting, but I think it's important to remember that we've only just scratched the surface of understanding our own emotions.
Right.
We've talked about all these different theories and perspectives, but they can only take us so far.
Absolutely. I mean, science can tell us a lot about the mechanics of emotion,
Right.
the biology, the cognitive processes, but it can't really fully capture what it actually feels like to experience those emotions. It can't really describe the feeling of joy or grief or love in a way that does it justice.
It's like trying to explain the taste of chocolate to someone who's never had it.
Exactly.
Words can only get you so far.
That's a great analogy. And that's where things like art, literature, music, and even just our own personal reflections, that's where they come in.
Yeah.
They offer us this deeper understanding of the human emotional experience, one that goes beyond what science can really capture.
So it's like science gives us the map, but art is what allows us to actually experience the emotional landscape
Yes.
in all its richness and complexity.
Exactly. And I think it's important to remember that learning about emotions isn't just a scientific pursuit. It's also an invitation to really explore our own hearts and minds, to connect with others on a deeper level, and to appreciate the beauty and the complexity of being human.
That's a beautiful way to put it. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of emotions,
Sure.
I want to leave everyone with this thought. Don't be afraid to explore your own emotions. Pay attention to how you feel. Expand your emotional vocabulary. And, seek out art and literature that really speaks to your soul. And just remember, you're not alone in this. We're all connected by this shared experience of what it means to be human.
Well said. Keep feeling, keep exploring, and, keep diving deep.
And that brings us to the end of our deep dive. Until next time.